Hey everybody, this is Bondilyn Jolly. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Elm Street and the Managing Partner at 365 Agency. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy holidays. I'm dressed festively. I've got Denis Pepin with me. He is my VP of Business Development, as well as the broker owner of United Real Estate Professionals in Huntington Beach. Hey Denis, you're not looking quite as Christmassy as I am today.
Yeah, no, I've got back-to-back meetings going on because everything's trying to cram in before the holidays here. So I thought it could probably be appropriate to wear, what I was wearing earlier on, which is my normal dress.
Well, fine, be that way then. Well, while we've got people that are actually popping into the room, let's just go ahead and cover a few logistics before we dive in. So we are recording today's webinar, so we will make this available for you. So if you miss part of it, you dial in late, you have to leave early, don't worry. We're recording it and everybody will receive a link. We do have some great downloads and information that we're going to share with you at the end. So those will also be made available to you in an email on the backside. If you have any questions at any time during today's webinar, you have two different options. There's a Q&A selection and there's also a chat option. I've got both of those open on my monitor. Feel free to post any questions. We are going to save a little bit of time for Q&A at the end of our discussion today. But if you have a question that you feel is relevant and it can get integrated into the conversation, we'll go ahead and entertain it at that time. Denis, is that everything?
I think so. I think you've
All right then. So here is Denis's and my contact information. We'll also make it available again at the end. But if you have any questions or want to connect with us or schedule any one-on-one time with us to discuss recruiting, business growth strategies, whatever that case is, go ahead, grab a screenshot of our contact information. Email is always a great way to catch us, or you can visit us at 365.agency and fill out our contact forms there as well. All right, Denis, let's dig into recruiting. We've got 1 hour. We are knee deep in recruiting season. And even though we believe that recruiting should ultimately be a year-round initiative, obviously Q4 and Q1 of the year are a really big recruitment time. So let's just start with why.
Yeah, well, so it's typically, in around the October-ish to about February, March. And a lot of the reasons for this being the actual season, like hunting season, if you will, is the fact that, we are coming to the end of the year. There are agents out there that are contractually, calendarized contractually obligated to the brokerages that they're affiliated with. They may have compensation plans and structures that have certain caps. You reach an X amount, and then after that, your compensation structure changes from that particular standpoint. It's also a time of reflection. It's income tax time. And so the agent gets to actually reflect on, the previous year as to, how much they've actually paid, what they've actually received in return. They might be feeling, certain angst, if you will, in terms of, whether or not they're actually getting the right support and services. And maybe we should be kind of looking at what our options are. Let's just put it this way. During this time of the year, particularly, the end of November, December, and January has a tendency to be a slower season. Less people are going out looking for properties. Their holiday season, there's going to be less agents for working out there. By the way, the winter months, November, December, January, were always my best months as an agent out there because less agents to compete with. But anyway, so during those particular months, most of the agents have a lot of time to reflect and consider what their current situation is. So does that help?
Of course. And Denis, you and I work with real estate brokerages all around the United States on their business growth strategies. And that's everything from recruiting and retention, mergers and acquisition, just gap analysis and understanding, how to better serve their community, their agents, and help their agents serve their buyers and sellers. And so, we always like to start whenever we're working with a new brokerage, we always like to start with, the brokerage is right secret to long-term and sustainable growth. And that's what we're always looking at. And so this slide that I actually pulled up here are 5 different facets of your brokerage business model that we always look at when we're having a conversation with you. And I think it's really important because you'll see that recruiting and retention is one of those 5 facets. And if you imagine those 5 facets sort of being like a spoke on a wheel, right? All 5 of them have to work in conjunction and balance with each other. And if we have weaknesses or gaps in one or more of those areas, it can create a lot of imbalance across your entire organization. And so Denis, just based off of our experience, I think between you and I mean, you're over 30 years in the real estate business. I've been consulting with organizations and helping with business growth for over 10 years now. And so I think we've seen every single challenge that could possibly exist. I don't think there's anything that a broker can throw at us and that we haven't seen in one way or another. And I think it's kind of interesting because brokers will come to us and they'll be like, oh my God, I'm having this problem. And we'll be like, oh yes, we have seen this. This is, there's recurring themes in the problems that we see. And so typically we start with digging into these 5 facets, right? So obviously there's the financial analysis side, like where the rubber meets the road, right? Your bottom line. We look at your brand and marketing, like who you are in your community, how you're perceived, right? Who you are, what you do, why you matter, all of your systems and processes, your staffing, and then your recruitment and retention. And so those are these 5 pieces that we look together when we're working with a customer. So Denis, I thought we would just jump in and start with some of those exploratory questions. So when a brokerage comes to us, whether, you're successfully recruiting, but looking to expand on that, maybe you have some challenges, right? Maybe you're really strong over in your financial modeling or your systems and processes, but recruiting isn't necessarily where, one of your strong points are. So this is just some initial introductory questions that we always start with when we're talking to a brokerage. And these are questions that, as we're discussing them right now, you can self-explore. We do have a download for you at the, actually, we were going to put that download up at the end, but Erin, if you could go ahead in the chat, go ahead and post a link to that download. We have a recruitment guide. So a lot of the different talking points and tips and strategies and questions that we're posing today are actually available in that download. So it's 365.agency/recruitment guide. Erin just shared a link with you in the chat. So you can go ahead and click that. All those questions are posed in that guide for you. So don't feel like you have to screenshot this or write them down and make notes. Just get involved with the conversation here. But basically, it starts with, do you have a strong grasp on those 5 key facets of your business? And if not, where are you strong? Where are you weak? We all have our strengths and weaknesses. And then, Denis, this is huge. And I know this is huge for you and your organization, right? Making sure that you have the right administrative staff around you to compensate. And when it comes to recruiting, right, we've got a lot of brokers, particularly if you're a practicing broker, it's hard to just even sometimes find that time to set aside for your recruitment initiative. So do you have staff? Do you have a recruiter? Do you have people that you can tap into and leverage their strengths, to really spiral up an intelligent and aggressive recruitment strategy?
Yeah, because you look at the statistics for for the US. The average real estate brokerage actually has between about 5 to 10 agents, the average. And so the 9 times out of 10, the broker owner is, like you said, is an active producing broker because they have to help, pay for the overhead. So if you understand the nuances of your company, obviously that type of brokerage, bringing on brand new agents can be very, very tedious. And by the way, time challenging as well, right? Because brand new agents really need to be handheld. On the other side of the equation, if you've got a larger organization that has the infrastructure, in other words, has the administrative staffs, the educators that actually, and the processes, if you will, to actually bring those new agents in and train them through the actual process of becoming, a successful agent and running their own business. That's the differences between the two. So you really have to understand, where do we fit? within our not only within our market, our competitive market area, and what our value proposition that we offer the agents, but what can we support? And that's going to be a real big one right there is, what can we support?
Right. And I know we have some tips where we're going to talk
Yeah.
specifically about that, as well as agent avatars.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you touched on the last few points here, right? Leveraging technology to accomplish brokerage goals, value proposition. You mentioned that, right? And that really helps us determine, like I mentioned, who you are, what you do, why you matter, and then pairing you with who that right agent is to fit your value proposition. Also, Dennis, we do a lot of competitive analysis, and it just never ceases to surprise me how many brokerages really don't have their finger on the pulse of their competitors in their community. And so therefore, when they start to lose agents or it's sort of like this reactive approach where they're suddenly, deep diving in, trying to understand who their competitors are and what their value propositions are and how they compare. So that's really something that's really important to understand who your competitors are, what they have to offer the agents, and how you can compare and contrast with them. And then also just overall arching reputation, right? Brand reputation in your marketplace. If you have a strong brand, you're well known, well respected, well liked, it's a lot different story for us when we're working with you on recruiting and retention versus if there's been, some administrative turnovers and some turbulence inside your organization. So that's a big factor that we have to look at, and we need our brokers to be really transparent with us when we have those types of conversations.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the long story short here is that there's an agent for every model. There really is. You just have to be able to do one of two things, right? First, you have to understand who you are and what your value is. What can you offer, and then just match them with the right agent who actually can benefit from that value.
Well, Dennis, if it's that simple, then we can just be done with this webinar and call it a day for everybody.
Okay, well, have a great Christmas, everybody.
It's a little bit more than that, but I mean, in the simplest forms, right? That's true.
Well, that's where the analysis comes into play, right? Is to really understand and dig deep and understand, on both sides, what do we do? What do we offer? What is our value? And then find the right, that right agent that fits that model.
Exactly. So let's start at the beginning though.
Okay.
Let's take it a step back. And, one of the things that we always start with our clients is defining your outcome. Like, what is the end game? What is your exit strategy? And it's interesting because a lot of times, the reason that you became a broker owner in the first place was maybe you were a high producing agent, and wanted to sort of spiral off and do things on your own, felt that you could do things better or more efficiently than the organization you were in. And so we have this tendency, just sort of as these A-type personalities to grab the bull by the horns and leap into this business model and not necessarily think about how you're going to get out of it in the end, right? Or what determines success for you, or where you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, et cetera. And so by looking at the end game, it really helps us to work backwards, right? Like Dennis, I use you as an example. You run a very intimate, a small boutique brokerage. And for you have a very strong business model around that. We take you and compare you to somebody who's running a, 350, 500 agent office. It's a totally different business model, right? Yeah. And that has to make sense. Now, if we took you and everything that you do and tried to plug you into that other model, it would be a mess for you. It wouldn't be successful.
It'd be a giant fail. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's on the structure. So, it's a challenge in itself, and everybody has to be, really realistic as to, what your goals are and what your end game is, and then strategize accordingly, right? And it's a building process. It just doesn't happen overnight, unless, of course, it becomes an acquisition or a merger, right? Because that's
and we're actually doing a lot of M&A activity with clients right now, right? But yeah, I think that there's every single real estate business model out there. There's something for everybody, and I think you alluded to that earlier. And so for us, understanding like what business model, like what your business model looks like, right? That's when we get into like those finances and those offerings and everything. Whether you're part of like a national affiliation, whether you're a small independent brokerage, or part of a growing independent team, you know,
Right.
I think it's really important to understand, okay, where is that sweet spot for you? Where do you ultimately want to be?
Yeah.
And then we work backwards. What does that look like in terms of the numbers of agents? How quickly you even want to allow your growth to happen? Because if you go from 10 agents to 100 agents, you know, in a 90-day time period, is that even something that's feasible and attainable for you?
And then part of the end game portion of this too, Bondilyn, is the fact of, as you well know, and I do, is, you know, what's your exit strategy, right? That's your end game. Is this going to be a legacy issue? So are we going to hand this down to a sibling or you know, a child or a family member? Is it something that we're going to package up and sell as an acquisition for another company or for another ownership, you know, that type of thing. So all that.
Well, and sometimes you have to have a plan B, right? So we have Dennis and I have a client actually right now that we've been working with on recruitment initiatives for, you know, the bulk of 2021. And his entire exit, right, plan was he was creating a legacy that his only child was going to inherit. And unfortunately, his child passed away unexpectedly a few months ago. And so all of a sudden, his entire end game changed. And so he's come back to us, and now we're reevaluating and questioning and working on what his plan B looks like for him. And so, you know, I always like to say, and I always say, you have to kind of plan for the divorce, right? Like this is always the ideal scenario of where my end game is going to go and what's going to happen. But I always have to have that plan B, or, you know, that alternative.
Especially with partnerships, right? When you've got partnerships, the favorite line that I was actually given many years ago by business analysts and people that I've met in the industry is that, you know, it's like a marriage, right? You best actually talk about the separation now while you like each other.
Well, that's why I said plan for the divorce. What's the worst case? Always plan for the worst case.
Talk about it. Yeah. Talk about it now while you like each other. Don't do it.
And put that in writing, by the way, too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I like everything in writing. Okay. So, and let's just go ahead and actually ask our attendees. So how many of you actually have a truly defined end game or exit strategy in play? Like something that, you know, this is my goal of where I'm working towards, and then I'm able to work backwards. So just go ahead, like in the chat, just share with us, like, yep, I've got an end game, or I know what my exit strategy is. And if you want to share what that is too, let us know. And exit strategies are all different, right? Like we said, it could be like creating a legacy that goes through an inheritance. It could be, you know, preparing for a merger and acquisition. Like when I grew actually my last company, my entire end goal was to go through a merger and acquisition, you know, to grow my company to a certain point and then allow somebody to take it and run with it from there. And so I was able to successfully accomplish that M&A and then move on to the next phase of where my career took me. Some of you, it might just be literally taking all of your clients and everything and bundling them up and nicely handing them over, you know, to a colleague, or literally just closing your doors and hitting the tropics.
Yeah, you know, it is surprising to me, Bondilyn, how many, and it really mostly applies to agents. I mean, not necessarily for brokerages, businesses, but how many people just walk away from the business that actually has a value to it, right? Because this, what we're talking about, doesn't just apply to brokerages, it does apply to agents too. And we as broker owners, we actually are laden with the responsibility of making sure we're educating the agent on the same, because we actually have that opportunity to help them. But by the way, that adds to your value proposition, right?
Yeah, and you know what, that's a great point, Dennis. So I actually have a friend that is an agent up in the Northwest area. And when she was starting in the real estate business, she had recently relocated from Canada into the United States. And so, you know, she did not have a huge sense of community to where she had moved, right? She didn't have a lot of history. And what she ended up doing is she aligned herself with a couple of agents that were that were aging out inside of her community. She, you know, approached them for mentorship. And in the end, she ended up inheriting, as they exited the business, she took over more and more of their business. And in the end, inherited both of their books of business. And it was huge for her. And she grew very, very rapidly in her first, 24 to 36 months in the business as a result of that. So it was a really intelligent strategy.
It's much easier to actually garner the business of a consumer if you're being referred to them by the agent who actually has longevity with that individual than trying to get them as a cold call. So much easier.
Right. All right. So tip number one, start with the end game.
Yep.
Right. So that helps us figure out, how many agents should you realistically, are you trying to grow to? How quickly are you trying to do that? And then how do we work backwards and figure out what is reasonable, to recruit within 2022, right? Within a 12-month period, a 24-month period, 36, et cetera.
Yeah.
Great. So let's move on. So as we're doing that, of course, part of this is tied to the goals and the budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't like to play with budgets and do financial projections. And that's not the fun part, but it is such an important part, right? And Dennis, it was like how I said with you, for you, if we wanted to take your unique and boutique business model and try to suddenly, throw 350, 400 agents on top of it, it would just completely self-implode.
Yep.
And so it's really important that, we understand those numbers, because that helps us figure out the types of agents you need, what those agents need to look like in terms of transaction volume, GCI, in terms of what the cost of supporting those agents. People say, oh, I want the top 5% of producing agents in my market, but, can you actually support and service them the way that they expect to be supported and serviced? And if not, what is that cost going to look like? These are really big, important factors we have to take into consideration.
Yeah, because now, even though with technology, nowadays it always was the idea back in the day. It was particularly the early days when I was starting real estate, and that was, the newer agents were the ones that actually cost the most to actually support and service, and that's not necessarily true. When you start dealing with, high producers and what have you, those are the individuals that can be very draining on your support and services within your organization, and the requirements that they have are also on a much higher end because you are dealing with multiple transactions, right? So when you start to look at it that way, it's really important to, like I said, to lay this out, almost like opening up a towel, lay this out and understand, where everything is at, and understand, what is realistic, what's not. And when we do that, and when we align that correctly, you're going to actually see a very smooth growth transition happen in the actual process.
At 100%. All right. So tip number one was
understanding your end game.
Understanding your end game. Tip number two is how do all your goals, your budgets, and everything like that plug into that end game? And then the next is, and I alluded to this earlier, is really understanding your competition. And when you're actively recruiting agents or, just retaining your existing agents, they're constantly aware. Good agents are being headhunted all of the time, right? Somebody's always trying to recruit them, and they are evaluating the competition.
Yeah.
And so you need to be aware of the competition at all times, because your agents are aware. You need to be, what are the strengths and weaknesses of your competitors? How does their business model compare and contrast to yours? What kinds of services do they offer? If you're a small independent, how are you stacking up against some of the large affiliations that might be in your market that have really, really strong, global resources behind them that you may or may not have? And what is the overarching company culture? I think that is really huge, Dennis. And I think particularly coming out of the last 2 years of, the COVID, I think a lot of people have taken the time to really self-reflect
Oh, yeah,
on what is important to them personally and professionally,
absolutely.
and the organizations that they truly and ultimately want to align themselves with, and make sure that, morally and ethically and culturally that it's an appropriate fit. I think we've all decided that I think time's a little bit too short to be aligned somewhere we don't want to be.
Yeah, there's a number of repetitive business models that are out there, and it becomes a little bit of a challenge with regards to established or existing brokerages trying to determine what the competition is doing. You never want to actually send your agents, particularly your really good producing agents out there to do any recognizance for you. But the reality of it is that these agents are dealing with agents from those companies, and your agents can actually be a good liaison to find out what the value proposition is from the other companies out there. But at the bottom line here, you have to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are and what their strengths and weaknesses are. That SWOT analysis for everybody. And in doing so, you actually now can determine, where your position is within the competitive landscape, and then determine, what do I have that they don't? And regardless, by the way, these behemoths that are out there that have, hundreds of offices nationwide or globally that have those technologies that are backing them behind the scenes. That doesn't mean that you can't compete with them. It's not a throw in the towel situation. You'll definitely have something that they do not have. And that is the bigger they get, the more structure they have to have in place to be able to support that size, right? So,
well, yeah, I think there's a unique value proposition, and that's the one thing that I really love when we work with all of our clients, large and small, is really, what is that unique story that defines you? And this actually makes me think, Dennis, of Rush. So Rush Realty, a very small independent brokerage. When we started working with them earlier this year, they were just about a year in the business, fast growing, aggressively growing, but working with them, right, to define, what was their unique value proposition in their market. They're in the Delaware market, looking to expand, multi-state, expanding out from Delaware. And so we did a really fun exercise with them, really helping them define and find their why. And that entire storyline ended up becoming the storyline that we used for recruiting. And you know what? I have their video. So give me a second, everybody. Let's take a look at this.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the approach that we came up with to really portray a real emotional push to this. Like, it really kind of hits you emotionally with respect to it, because he's amongst all the big players that are around him, and being somebody that's brand new, that's coming in, the big question is, will you be around? But take a look at this and see what you think.
So this is called Find Your Why.
When I first got my license, I didn't know what to expect.
I didn't even know what I wanted. I didn't know how to close deals or even what success looked like.
I just knew I wanted to do great things. Statistically, everything was stacked up against me.
I didn't know how to begin, what I should be doing, where I should look for help.
But I knew I wanted more, so I had to remember why.
Why was I doing what I was doing? And while finding my why, I made it our Rush goal to help every agent find their why.
Why I make 100 calls a day.
Why I knock on doors.
Why am I comfortable being uncomfortable?
Why I stay up late planning for tomorrow.
Why I spend hours.
Why I take time to learn my client's needs.
Why I set goals to get back.
Why I push to make myself number one.
Why I surround myself with success.
Why I choose to do more.
Why should you choose to be more?
That's such a great piece.
Yeah, it's playing from an emotional standpoint, and it really conveys a strong message, as we are here to help everybody realize why we're in this business. What we do is we help people, and being such a small up and comer amongst all these big players that are around them, he's just like, he's knocking it out of the park. They're doing a great job at their recruiting and with the messaging that we're providing them with. So kudos to us too, I guess.
Well, but that's part of the fun, right?
Yeah. Oh,
and,
yeah.
And that's why all of these questions that we're posing and sharing with all of you that are watching today is really, this is the level of due diligence that we do. And this is what we went through with Marcus Rush and his team. I mean, because they were coming out and they're like, okay, we have these goals. We have this vision of where we want to go. How do we tell that story? Right. And so it's just a really, really fun exercise. And it doesn't matter, even if you're like a big, part of a big affiliation, like a Remax or part of the Realogy network, there's sort of who you are as that overarching corporate side, but there's still that unique and individual story of who you are organizationally and within your community and that role that you play in that community. And I think that there's always an opportunity to tell that story in a really heartfelt, emotional way. Denis, you and I talk about this all the time. Agents do not choose to join your brokerage because of the financial model. I mean, there's a compensation model out there for everybody.
Yeah.
There's always other reasons that are compelling them to make change. And it's usually a much, much more emotional decision.
Yep.
And I think that if we can truly help businesses capture and convey that emotional side of that choice, that's where we see success. And that's why we see so much success with somebody like Marcus.
Many years ago, I had a recruitment coach and she provided me with one line that I use to this very day. And I share it with pretty much everybody I talk to. And that line is that, we talk about, agents transitioning from one brokerage to the next because of dollars. Her line that she gave me is, there's always a cheaper place to fail. I've not met very many agents in my 32 years of being in this business that have actually looked to transition from a brokerage only because of money. It almost never is because of money. The only reason for it, by the way, to become because of money is because that agent is actually not selling at all. They're looking for a place to park their license. They just don't want to give that up. 9 times out of 10, an agent is actually moving or changing brokerages for one reason or another. And typically, it is often going to either be a support and services issue, or it's going to be a relationship issue. 9 times out of 10. And anyway, so what we do is try to make sure that you're understanding the nuances of everybody else that you're competing against out there, what their value propositions is in relation to what yours is, so that these challenges, these questions and these concerns of the agents, when they come up, actually know how to handle them.
So Denis, a question just came in. So, we've got the 100% commission models.
Right.
And so, and I remember when the 100% commission model was the bright new shiny toy. Yeah. I think that was a huge.
Wasn't that long ago, by the way.
It was not that long ago. And I think that was a really huge recruitment attractor. I think that we're far beyond that now. And I know you actually run a 100% commission model. And one of the things that you do that I love, and this is what I recommend for all of you, I don't care what your business model is, but this is a wonderful exercise that Denis does with all of his prospects, is he has an interactive spreadsheet. So when he's sitting down with a recruitment prospect, he can pull up this spreadsheet. And if the commissions and the money comes into the conversation, which ultimately does at some point, you have that conversation, he can literally, on one side, he has his entire business model, right? And then he can plug in all of the figures related to any commission model. So it's very interactive. And then he can literally do side-by-side comparisons. So you can, right now is a time where Denis is going in and historically looking back with prospects over, the course of 2021. And, what kind of revenue did they recognize, what kind of commissions, et cetera, what does that look like? And do a side-by-side comparison if they were in his office under his commission models, this is what that your 2021 would have looked like financially. Here's what it looks like for you. And it's that ability for you to do a compare and contrast exercise. And it's very powerful because sometimes it's 100% in your favor, and other times it's not. And that opens you to have those really open and honest and transparent conversations. So if they're not going to move based on commission, then why?
One thing I want to share with everybody so that they understand it, this goes beyond, by the way, the share that the agent keeps as opposed to the what they give up for the brokers. It goes beyond that. It's letting the agent understand, what did you spend to market yourself, in addition to the fact of, the commissions that you made. What were your expenses? What did you spend to market yourself? How many transactions did you have? What type of compensation was associated with each one of those transactions? And really narrow it down to the point of making them understand you are running a business, and therefore we can probably help you in certain areas. So, everybody's going to be different that's on this call, but, you might have areas where it's going to help them alleviate costs with certain marketing, or costs with certain technologies, or costs with certain support services that they absolutely need. So there's many different assets of this, facets of this that we go through with those specific agents. So it does start with the actual compensation structure. A lot of agents specifically that are affiliated with some of the big brands that have royalty-based commission structures that are on there, they may not even recognize the fact that there's an additional royalty that the agent pays over and above the actual split that they've agreed to with brokers. But it's just the end dollar. How much money do you have in your pocket to help support yourself and your family? That's
Well, and Dennis, I like the fact that you brought up the support and services side of that, because we have, the average agent is using between 8 to 10 different technology services, just to manage the day-to-day of their business.
Yeah. And the brokerage 12 to 24, by the way.
Yeah, and brokerages are even greater than that. And so, when we'll come into a brokerage, a lot of times when we're coming in and we're really looking at, those 5 facets that we talked about, systems and processes, support and services, are all fall under that. And it'll be really interesting because we'll be like, okay, wait a second, you offer, this suite of technology services for your agents, you're missing this, you're losing agents to a competitor who is, offering that. And a lot of times brokers aren't thinking, okay, what are all these additional costs? What does that look like if you're an agent inside of my organization? What are your outside costs outside of just the fees that you're paying based on your transactions? And you really need to look at that because, agents are looking at that. It's all on their P&L every single year, or at least they should be looking at that. And that can be a huge attractor for them, to migrate either to you or away from you if you're not able to competitively service them.
Well, it's all in the analyzation, right? So you kind of look at it saying, okay, well, here's a service, let's say, that the competitor seems to be capitalizing on for attracting agents. And so, what's the cost of that service based on the number of agents that you would bring in with the transactions that you would get? If you look at the analyzation, you look at the math, oftentimes it's much less expensive to go ahead and acquire that and offer that service, right? So that you can be competitive. But that's all part of the analyzing of the structure, analyzing your value proposition and in comparison to what's out there.
Yeah, and that makes me think of this tip too, right? Defining your ideal agent. And we deal with this all the time with all of our brokers, right? They come to us and I made the reference earlier. All these brokers will say, I want the top 3 to top 5% of performers in my market. And we'll go, okay, well, let's look at your business model. Let's look at your commission models. Let's look at your support and services, your tech stack, your marketing, and let's see how you're going to leverage that to realistically attract these top performers. Because we also look at where are those top performers currently sitting and what does that package that they're currently living within look like? And Dennis, there's a lot of times, and you and I both know this, there's a lot of times that in the end, we define that ideal agent, that perfect avatar for our client isn't necessarily that one random outlier or what you would have to put into place to service one or two of these outliers doesn't really fit into the core competency of
Yep.
where you are, or where you should be as a brokerage.
There's quite a few times there's an eye wide open situation that happens when we come up with the avatar that actually fits the business model. I mean, the process that we do for this is beyond just an off-the-shelf recruiting application that you leverage against. You know, we are actually business consultants. We're here to help you grow your business. And the most important thing of all, and I say this to everybody that I talk to on an ongoing basis, and that is, you need to understand who you are and what you do and what you have to offer. In other words, what's your value? If we can match that, it's like I said at the very beginning of this, if we can match the right agent for that value, your success of recruiting skyrockets. It does. Because
and sometimes it's more than one agent, Dennis. You know, I mean, we have one client we're working with right now. We've got about 5 different agent avatars.
Yes.
And this is kind of interesting because this is an organization that has the ability to attract top performers. They have number 2 and number 3, you know, of their market already at their office. They're working, we're working on number 1 with them, but they also have an amazing education program for new agents, right? So we have an entire communication path with new agents over here that's very, very different than those you know, top performers, or even we've got mid-levels that work well with them, right? 3 to 5 million performers who are just having a hard time reaching that next level in performance. And so we have multiple avatars with them. The conversations have to be so completely different though. Well, that's really imperative.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, so the needs of a new agent is completely different than the needs of a high performing agent, right? And you know, understanding and knowing, you know, where do we look and who are we looking for is most important. We've got that one client that we're working with right now where their avatar, and we say avatar, which is the description of the agent, is really what we're talking about. Their avatar is an agent that actually does $10 million transactions or higher. That's the minimum. And so, you know, what's that conversation look like? What does that marketing perspective or that approach and recruitment approach look like? Far too often, and we see this still today, and I've seen this for years, where you see the recruiting aspect of the majority of brokerages and companies that are out there is they put one message that's repetitive over and over and over again. Maybe they change the images, and maybe they slightly change some of the verbiage in the actual content, but nothing changed. Nothing speaks directly to the agent specifically. And that's what we do, is we actually have, like you were saying, Bondilyn, we have these different conversation buckets a lot of times, especially with companies that are looking for different levels of agents in terms of what they can support. So we'll have all these different conversation buckets. So we're actually creating that relationship, that's what we're in, is a relationship business, just like we were as an agent, or our agents are with the consumer, is we're trying to reach one peak, and that peak is trust. As soon as you get and gain that trust with that individual, whether it be a consumer as an agent or whether it be an agent as a broker, once you gain that trust, your chances of success of doing business with that individual, again, skyrockets.
It's true. It's really about, you know, helping create truly meaningful and thoughtful connections between the brokerage and their candidates.
Absolutely.
You know, and there's brokers that just, you know, they struggle with that, right? And that's where we can really come in and help. And that leads to the next point is really creating intelligent recruitment workflows. So, and a lot of times, you know, I'll use the analogy, okay, look at like when you invest in consumer lead generation for your brokerage, and you're bringing, you know, those buyers and sellers in to your CRM, and you're distributing them, and you have these workflows, and you have automated outreach and all these different things that are happening, right? Because you're trying to move as many of those prospects through the conversion pipeline and into a closed transaction, either for yourself or your agents. Recruiting is a lot of the same approach. Like we have to create intelligent workflows. Like, if that prospect engages with this, what happens next? How do we continue to have that meaningful and thoughtful connection with them and move them? Our goal is always to get them to sit down one-on-one with the broker And then ultimately, you know, and by the time that we get them to that conversation with the broker, we already know that they're the right candidate because we've spent the time to define and curate who those candidates are. We've taken the time to put appropriate, meaningful, and thoughtful communication in front of them through a variety of means, right? Through email, through text, through social media, through call campaigns, through landing pages and online interaction, through direct mail, even Dennis. You know, we use a lot of different communication channels, you know, to move those prospects, you know, through our recruitment workflow. So by the time they sit down to have that conversation with the broker already has a clearly defined understanding of who that person is, what makes them tick, you know, what is compelling them, you know, to make a decision. So it's a very, very warm handoff, and it's a very intelligent conversation at that point.
A lot easier to talk to somebody and create a more warm conversation if you know more about that person prior to actually speaking to them. And by the way, the perception on the other side of the individual you're speaking to has now the perception that you've actually invested time. You actually have interest in them, not just their commission split, right? And that's what it really boils down to. And that helps create that, enhance that trust factor I was talking about just recently. And that's the most important part is to get to that point. Because again, once you get to that point, it is much easier for you to relate, much easier for that person to relate to you, and then be able to close the deal. In other words, get them to join forces with your brokerage and your company.
Yeah. And Dennis, that actually goes to our next point, right? Is investing in the agents. And there's something that you say to so many of our clients, and this I just think is really important to bring up is, you know, you always used to say, like in the old days, right? Brokerages would always look at agents and go, oh, what can the agent do for me?
Yeah.
You know, how can I make money from the agent? Right.
Yeah.
And really in today, you know, when we look at, you know, the types of agents that are coming in the market, we see this growing millennial and Gen Zers that are coming into the space, you know, a place where culture matters, where there's every kind of business model out there. You know, I think it's really important to invest in the agents and flip that mentality, you know, as a servant leader in the space. What can you as a broker do for your agents? How can you invest in them? How can you be of service to them?
Yeah.
And if you take that tactic, it's going to work a lot better for you.
So for those of you that are on this call that have similar tenure to myself, so, you know, basically 20 years ago, real estate was a lot different than it is today. You know, when I started real estate, you know, it was pre-internet, it was pre-cellular phones. I mean, we're still working off of pagers and having to go to a payphone to actually return
What
a call.
are those?
Payphones? Yeah. Or pagers, or both. I mean, back in those days, it was, you know, dependent upon the number of transactions the agent would actually do would depict what compensation structure they would actually be on, right? So what can you do for the brokers? That was the mindset, if you will, of the business models in the real estate industry at that time. I truly believe it's completely reversed. I mean, now it's more like what the brokerage can do for the agent. And you know, at the end of the day, it goes far beyond, you know, I've got CRMs, I've got marketing materials, I've got, you know, blah. It goes beyond that. To me, it is all about us taking the stance of saying that to the agents that we are your business development professionals. In other words, we're going to help you understand how to run, how to create, how to grow, and how to be successful of running your own real estate business under our umbrella. And that's really what it's all about, right? So, and that's what agents want. Now, when you talk about millennials, Bondilyn, I mean, they want it now. So they want it very, very quickly. So you have to be prepared to deliver. But that's really the nuances of the two. Investing in your agents. And then, in other words, you know, I may be an active broker. There may be some of you on this call that have smaller brokerages like mine that may be an active broker. I myself am not, but you know, if you're an active broker because you are contributing to the overhead and what have you, then your time restraints are going to be there, right? So how much time do I have to devote to not only conducting my business to continue to contribute to the overhead, but how much time do I have to actually run the actual brokerage, right? Manage the responsibilities, because an agent is always calling you up saying, hey, listen, do you have a moment? And that moment ends up being 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes, right? And so the problem is what falls short 9 times out of 10, what falls short every single time in any brokerage, and that is, growing your business. How much time do you devote to actually growing your business? Because that's the whole point of this, right? That's why you have a brokerage. And the way to do that is through recruiting and retention. And that's where we come in. So
yeah, so that actually goes to our last point. And it was funny, as you were sitting here just talking about that, I was thinking about, this last year when we had the organization down in the Southeast that reached out to us, huge organization, over 1,000 agents.
oh yeah.
And did not have a problem recruiting at all.
Yeah.
Did not have a problem, but they were experiencing record high churn rates, like 50%.
Bringing like 1,000 people a year or something, right?
1,000 new agents a year, but 500 going out the back door.
Yeah.
And you just said, you made that point, like they could not see the trees through the forest, or is it the forest through the trees, right? What does that saying go? But they were so knee deep in their day-to-day of their business operations, and they could not figure out where the problem was. And so, they needed a third party like us to come in who was not emotionally invested in that business model, who could come in and just look at everything very, very objectively and do a level of due diligence across their entire ecosystem and really define where their problem areas were. And then also outline, right, we put them on a 90-day course correction action, right? So we gave them literally a report after 30 days of due diligence, digging into all these parts and pieces of their business, determine, where their problem areas were, gave them a report and also outlined a 90-day course correction plan for them. And, so sometimes you need that, or sometimes you don't have the internal resources, the recruitment needs. I mean, we're working with a brokerage right now where there's 3 partners. One is 100% responsible for all of the recruiting, but he also has a bulk of other responsibilities, and it's very overwhelming. And so for us to be able to come in and serve as that recruitment marketing arm, or to service marketing teams that are very consumer focused, agent focused, it's a huge push for these organizations to leverage teams like ours.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got clients that are very, very large. We're talking well in excess of 100 offices, well in excess of thousands of agents. And they have internal marketing departments that are focused on supporting and servicing those agents, which is good because they're going to have that. But they share the exact same issues when it comes to recruiting that the other brokers that one of the other brokerages that we have as a client who only has 5 agents. And what it is what's the time and what's the process invested in actually recruiting? Recruiting has to have a portion of your time, effort, and expenses contributed to that. And that's where, we come into play. Some of these larger companies, their marketing departments, marketing divisions that they have, and even sometimes they have recruiters as well, but they don't have that support and services behind it because the marketing department is so busy focusing on the agent needs and making sure that they're from a consumer related marketing perspective. And so we specialize on the fact of helping you actually grow your business, whether that be, providing you with an off the shelf, if you will, simplified marketing tool that you can leverage against, to coming in and doing a full-fledged, basically pulling all your recruiting process right off the table with the exception of one thing. And that is putting the opportunity in front of your face and letting you actually sell your value proposition and close the deal. So we can do everything in between the two.
Excellent. So Dennis, I know we're running a little tight on time. I would like to open up for conversation, for questions. If anybody has questions for Dennis or myself, go ahead and put them in the chat or the Q&A section. I'm also going to share while we're seeing if anybody has some questions that come in, this free recruitment strategy guide. I know that Aaron shared the link earlier in the chat, but here is the link as well. So it's 3, the number 3, the word 65.agency. /recruitment guide. You can go in and download that. It's got a lot of great information. All of the tips that we discussed today, but also just some, Dennis, you and I have spent time interviewing some of the top recruiters, leaders of some of the top organizations across the United States. Tammy Bonnell, the CEO at Exit, Brenda Thompson, who has helped spiral up just hundreds of offices all across the United States in many ways. Just amazing minds inside of the space. Pat McFarland, who is just one of the top recruiters that we know. All of these people share some of their tips, tricks, and strategies inside of this guide. So go ahead and download it. I see some questions coming in. I'm also going to switch and I'm going to put up Dennis's contact information here. So Dennis is his email, mobile number, and the link to his Calendly scheduler is available. So reach out, schedule some time. If you schedule with Dennis, he'll invite me into that meeting as well. And let's just have a conversation. Let's see where you are, where you're going for 2022, and figure out how we can potentially assist you. Oh, and Aaron, thank you. Aaron also put a link inside of the chat to Dennis's Calendly. So you can just go ahead and click that and schedule. So Dennis, we've got a few minutes. Are you ready for a few questions?
Sure, why not? Why not?
Oh, hey, I like this one. How do I get good data on recruits outside of the MLS?
Oh, okay. Well, so the MLS, some MLSs will actually provide you some pretty decent data as far as the agent's information is concerned. Mine, unfortunately, we miss some of it. And one of the most important part is the email address, which I don't get. But, each MLS deliverable as far as data is concerned is different across the board. There are a couple third-party companies. Well, there's a few. The ones that come to mind, the big ones are Broker Metrics or a Trend Graphics. They have access to a significant amount of data. We have access to an awful lot of data, both on the MLS side as well as the consumer side, where we can actually curate an agent avatar. So curate a list based on that avatar, and then do a cross-reference from the consumer side. So we can kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak, on the missing data. We also have access, because of the consumer information, we have a little bit more information, more personalized information that we can have access to. So we can really define that avatar for you. But like I said, there's a couple of third-party providers out there. There's a few more that they don't come to mind off the top of my head, but the two most prominent ones are Broker Metrics and Trend Graphics, and they'll give you significant data in terms of historical as well as current, from a transaction volume and all that type of stuff is concerned. So
yeah, and I think there's a lot of creative ways that we can once we have access to data and combine or reconcile it, interesting ways that we can mine it. Like, for example, we've had clients who come to us and say, okay, well, I want everybody who's a new agent within the past 24 months. And based on some of the MLS data, that can be challenging. And so, but we have unique ways that we can go in and sort of figure out how to mine and look at that data and pull some of those interesting numbers.
Yeah.
And data can be licensing data, particularly like private consumer level data, can get very, very costly. So if you're, looking at doing some data licensing, certainly ping us. We can make some recommendations for you, or maybe able to assist from our side as well, and help drive some of those costs down.
Yeah.
Dennis, when is the best time to start implementing a recruitment strategy? So this sounds like somebody who maybe
that one's really easy. When did you start your business? That was the time. Start if you didn't start then start now. And I think we said this at the beginning, Q4 and Q1 of the year tend to be very, very high recruitment. We see a lot of recruitment volume there because of financial reasons and things like that. But recruiting truly it's a year-round strategy, and in the way that we work with our clients over the course of the year, as the real estate cycle sort of ebbs and flows, there's sort of an intelligence and a strategy to that. And I believe that it's important to always have something that is in play
at all times. And then, it's easy to sort of spiral that up or pull that back, based on what's happening in the market or that time of year.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's do, we've got several more questions. So if we don't get to your questions, that's okay. Like, we will respond to you and reach out to you personally. Dennis, I think we've got time just to do one more quick one.
All right.
Well, what tasks or aspects of the recruiting process do you recommend be outsourced? If you don't mind if I take that one, that's pretty open-ended, right? So
It sure
that
is.
goes back to us looking at those sort of 5 facets of your business that we started with.
Yeah.
Like, where are your strengths and weaknesses, and where do you have gaps or needs or challenges? And then that helps us figure out, okay, this is what, like, if you were going to outsource to us or to another organization, it really helps us to figure out where your strengths are, how we can come and plug in and fill in those weaknesses and really create a really intelligent, comprehensive program. So, so just go ahead and, reach out to us, schedule some time with us. Dennis, we're at the top of the hour. Any words of advice or closing statements as we close out our webinar today?
Yeah, I mean, building your business is an ongoing strategy. It is something that we have to do. It's it's the monster, and unfortunately, just like an agent, if the agent is going to want to achieve any business with the consumer, that consumer has to know who they are, what they do, and how to get a hold of them. And the same thing applies with you to the agent. But let's just do it. Let's just strategize and do it the right way, so you're actually going after the right people. Because, like I said at the very beginning, there's an agent for every business model, but not every agent is for your business model. And so understanding that, there are places, there are, resources that you can tap into that can assist you in building your business, putting you on the right path to gain, your goal in aspects of building your business is probably your best step.
Yeah, and that sort of parlays into my advice, Dennis. I think as business leaders, we're sort of these raging A-type personalities, and we think that we have control of everything all of the time, or that we should be that source of information all the time. And I think truly, to be successful as a business leader, we have to surround ourselves with people that are really going to to compensate for our strengths and weaknesses, that are going to ask those tough questions, and they're going to look at things objectively, to really help us grow. And so don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to reach out and surround yourself with the people that you need to get your business to that next level. Like I said, Dennis and I, there's not anything that we have not seen, and you're not going to throw us for a loop at all. So everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. This is our last webinar of 2021. We are going to enjoy the holiday season. We're going to be focusing on all of our education, training, business growth strategies across 365 and Elm Street as we head into the new year. So you're going to see a lot of really great new content coming from us into the new year. Reach out to us, connect with us, let us know how you're doing. Let us know where you're trying to go in 2022. We want to have a conversation with you. And in the meantime, I wish you all happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody.
All right. Thanks all. Bye.